So for you guys who haven't met me before, my name's Rob Bucchiet. I was recently I was the former CEO and creative director for Nectar Games Studios, a indie game dev startup based out here of Cincinnati. And we had a successful Kickstarter. We developed our game for over a year, and then we ran out of money. So today I'll be giving my talk just about, in general, postmortem style on what went right, what went wrong, and the lessons that I learned from this whole experience. So yes, Nectar Games Studios, the rise and fall of Nectar, a postmortem. So for any of you guys who haven't talked to me much before in the past, like I said, I was pretty much the head honcho of Nectar Games Studios. I describe myself as a dreamer. This whole thing started off as a dream of, ever since I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to make video games. Pretty much since I started playing Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario Brothers, like those formative years when I was real little and those consoles were first coming out. Like, I played those games, and I've always loved interactive storytelling and games of any kind, and that really just hit me right in the imagination, and like I knew I wanted to do this professionally. So unlike most kids who didn't have a lot of direction, I had kind of a laser focus on what I wanted to accomplish. I didn't really know how best to do it at the time, but I was always very creative. I was very into art. I ended up getting an art degree at University of Cincinnati in their DAP program. I thought I was there. There were some game development classes there when I first started attending back in like 2004 to 2009. Turns out those classes weren't offered anymore by the time I got that far. But I went ahead and continued with that undergraduate. Got my major and went on to get my master's from Full Sail University in Florida. I was in their game design and production program. Because at that point, like I knew I still wanted to get into games, and I really wanted to become a game designer, but that is a hard field to get into. A lot of times you have to go through QA or just get lucky. And a lot of companies like self-promote, you're going to be really hard pressed to find an entry-level game design job out there. A lot of them are like senior or better. So I thought that was going to be my best path into games, was to take the producer route. So I went to Full Sail for that, and afterwards, I moved back home with a mountain of debt, because that's an expensive school, and started the whole process of applying for jobs. And as you guys know, there's not many in Ohio. So I was applying all over the country. But being in this area, it's a little difficult to get hired for jobs out in California or Washington when there's tons of other people already there with the skill sets just like banging on the doors of these places. And I was too broke at that point to just like pack up and go. So at that point I started going to a lot of conventions and trying to meet other people who are already doing it and how they got in and what their advice was. I started volunteering at conventions. I really recommend that. It's a great way to go on the cheap, and you can get kind of access to people you normally wouldn't be able to talk to. If you weren't like getting them their water and stuff. And so I was lucky enough to meet some of like my industry heroes, like people I've looked up to and like made the games that really inspired me as I got older. And some of the best advice that I was given was, if you want to be a game developer, just start making games. So shortly after that, and graduating and not being able to find a job anywhere, I was like, screw it, I'm just going to get a day job and I'm going to start making games in my spare time. And shortly after that was when I got involved with Project Resurgence, which I'll get into more in a little bit here. But I am a reluctant leader. I am an introvert, beta male. I am not the kind of person to just kind of take charge and spearhead a project. But I helped come up with the idea for this game, and I cared about it enough that I wanted to make sure it happened. And so I kind of stepped up more into a leadership role over time, which is not my comfort zone like at all. But but I learned the skills that I needed when I was at school, and found out I was a better leader than I ever thought, and managed to rally a team together around me and really make some progress and make something cool. So if this is the first time you're hearing about Project Resurgence, that was the game that me and my co-founder... Project Resurgence, yeah. Yeah. I normally just call it Resurgence for short, but that's what we kickstarted it as. And so that idea was my co-founder, Ben Cassell, he's also known as Co-Carnage on Twitch. He came up with the original idea, and we met through a mutual friend back in 2012. And so he kind of pitched me on the idea of what this game was. It was a classic style role-playing game, very much in the vein of like Baldur's Gate, Fallout, and all these old computer role-playing games that were very very trying to replicate the experience of like a tabletop experience like D&D or anything like that. So very big focus on player freedom, a branching story, and high replayability in a vivid fantasy world, just like drenched in lore. So that was the whole concept, and I love those games. I really wanted to work on something like that, and I know from experience that like working on a RPG, especially for like your first professional project, not a good idea, because those games are huge. But we were like, all right, we're going to do it episodically. So we're going to release this game in separate story arcs, like seasons of a TV show, to keep the scope down and keep the whole thing manageable. Good idea, probably not enough to minimize the scope the way we needed to. So yeah, we first came up with the idea back in 2012 at the very end. We started working on it as a hobby project. We built up a team just by like posting on forums, talking to friends from school and work, and just rallying a small army of volunteers around this project. And last time I looked at the numbers, we've had over 100 people work on it at different points. Some people kind of like dropped in and out within a matter of weeks or a month, and some people stayed for years. So it really varied. But I felt very lucky that the amount of people that responded to the idea of the game and what we had already and wanted to see this thing made. And I was just astounded that it kept going, and everybody said how they worked on other volunteer projects like this before, and ours was the best organized and had the most progress and all of that stuff. So as we kept working on it over the years, we eventually decided that this thing was gaining steam, and we wanted to make a real go of it and tried to make a real studio and make this game for real. So in 2014, that's when we formed an actual LLC for the company. So it was no longer just a informal partnership kind of thing. 2015, I decided I quit my day job and went full time on it, and spent the next year planning our Kickstarter for trying to raise the initial funds we were going to need to make the game. And luckily, in February of that year, we successfully kickstarted. We raised over $180,000 from 3,000 backers on Kickstarter. At the time, we thought that money was going to be enough to finish all of our episode 1. But as time went on, we found out that those initial estimates were a bit off, and we needed more money. And so that ended up being just enough money to get us going and to make our initial demos and make some real progress, so we could start shopping it around for publishers, because we really didn't want this thing to die. So after that, in later that year, we finished with our pre-production, we thought, all of our initial planning on the game design and mapping out the story, how the story was going to branch, and all of the scheduling and pre-planning work that we needed to do to hit production. In December, that's when we got our first core demo done. The plan was to release 3 different core demos, each one focusing on one of our 3 big gameplay pillars. The first one was the dialogue system. So we released that. We showed it off at GDEX, and got a lot of good feedback. Like people really responded to the writing style of the game, and just the different mechanics we were adding to the whole conversation system. So it was more of we were really trying to get that tabletop experience where you have a lot of options and the characters respond to what you say and do different things based on your previous interactions with them. And you have more to do than just choosing what your character says. There's more things you can do, like using skills or just various actions you could do to manipulate the conversation the way you wanted it. After that, in June of this year, 2017, is when we got our next core demo done. That one was focused on exploration and stealth. And we had a very advanced stealth system, which more than I've seen in any other CRPG before, where much like other stealth games, you had the ability to kind of throw out distractions and manipulate the enemy AI so you could sneak around more effectively. So we were getting great feedback from everybody that played the game, loved everything we were doing, and loved all the innovation and how it felt like these old games that inspired us. And so in June was when we started realizing that the money was really getting low. Like we weren't going to be able to make payroll for another month after that. And we had been shopping around for months already trying to pick up a publisher. And we had got a lot of great leads, like people said that they were interested. We were talking to the heads of those companies, going through multiple stages of interviews, and then but one by one, each one just kind of gave us the no eventually for various reasons. Either they thought the game was too big, we were asking for too much money to finish it, but that was definitely a blow to find out that we couldn't raise the money from that source. We were kind of depending on a publisher to be like our first big source of funding. Like we were treating it as a startup, and like as any kind of small tech business, like it really was a startup, and we were thinking about going to investors and angel investors and all that stuff, but we really needed a strong lead investor to really solidify that this thing was worth investing in and raise the rest of the money that we needed. But where we located here, me being here in Ohio and the rest of the team all remotely spread out, it was that much more difficult to meet the people we needed to and make the connections to get that funding. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of that. There's not much money in games here in Ohio. So later in June, that's when we put up our announcement on social media that the money was out. We were going to have to dissolve the company. That was a really hard time for me because I'd spent almost 5 years working on this thing when it started as a hobby project, and just to admit to yourself that it's over, that what you built had failed. It's hard for it. It feels like a death, basically. Like I felt like I had to grieve it for a while, like this, watching this thing that I had built not go anywhere. And we were also starting the paperwork of trying to formally dissolve this thing as a legal entity, and that's where we are right now. Got a question. Yeah, I'm going to repeat questions just for the video to make sure people can hear them well. So the question was, did we look into grants and other things based on the city of Cincinnati and the area here in Ohio? And yeah, we looked into all those options. Grants are very hard to get. It's a very selective process that takes a long time. We definitely looked into it and we applied, but I don't know if we had tried earlier, there may have been more of a shot there. But yeah, none of the grant things turned out. We looked into business loans. We looked into pretty much every avenue of funding that we had available. But we kept thinking that like getting a publisher was kind of the first step that would make everything else kind of fall into place. And as any entrepreneur knows, like getting your first investor is always the hardest, and we never got past that point, unfortunately. So yeah, we were planning to, the idea was to release the game, episode 1 of Resurgence in January of 2018, a full year after we first promised we were going to do it for the Kickstarter. But as we got further in development, we realized really what the scope of this thing we were trying to make, and it came down to that we were trying to make a $500,000 game on less than half of that budget, is what it came down to. So, on a brighter note, first, I always like to start on the bright side, so I'm going to go through the things that went really right with Resurgence, the things that we were successful about and we were really proud of. So, the first one is just that we came up with a concept that was very nostalgic to people that love this, like, really passionate audience for this type of game, this like specific subtype of role-playing games, and we were bringing a lot of modern innovation to it. So we had the Kickstarter, which we hit our goal. We overfunded our goal, which we were all super excited about. Just knowing that we had this money to try and fulfill our dream project and bring all of these fans into our process to make something really special. So that was probably definitely the high point of the project as a whole, knowing that we were funded. We also had a really heavy focus on freedom, like I mentioned. We wanted players to really have a lot of make the game be open to the way they wanted to play. So you could go focused on combat, or you could go on dialogue, or being sneaky. There were multiple ways to accomplish every objective, and we wanted players to feel empowered and just rewarded by trying to really test the systems and find different ways to find different solutions to problems. So there was no wrong answer, and there was no like bad character builds, essentially. And we got a lot of really good feedback from people responding just to trying to focus on player freedom that much. And we also felt very proud about the demos that we put out. Like each one of those was each one was a huge step beyond the previous one, just a big upgrade in terms of graphics and gameplay. And when we released the last one just a couple months ago, we really felt like the game was finally coming together, and you could really see the potential of what else we could do with it. Not to mention the strong writing, and we also had a big focus on social progressiveness in the game. Like there's a lot of games out there where you can only play as like a white male character, and we were trying to let people design their player character however they wanted, so everybody could play as someone they could associate with, basically. Having strong female characters, not like objectifying anybody, so like no booby armor or anything like that. Just trying to make a realistic world and kind of push the medium forward. And a lot of our players really responded well to that. Like I talked to people on different communities on Reddit, like trans gamers and other people who felt like marginalized for a long time in the game community, and they were really happy that we were trying to put this stuff in our game without being like too in your face about it or preachy. Also, really, one of the big things we achieved was just the team that we built. Like I mentioned, this all started out as a hobby project. So the people involved were all people, they're all unpaid volunteers. Started out with just everybody giving up their free time to work on something cool. And we got really lucky in that we had a really wide, we got some really, people with really impressive backgrounds. People who'd worked on like AAA titles, and some of the examples here, like worked on Tomb Raider, XCOM, Dark Knight. We had people from 2K, EA, just other really big companies that like they had gotten laid off from their jobs, or they had to move, or various life things that got in the way of where they were, but they still had this knowledge and experience and just kind of wanted to do something smaller and more personal and something they could be really creative and really feel their own input on. So, but we went from that AAA talent all the way down to just like newbies, like right out of school, just hobbyists, people coming to meetings like this, just wanting to get involved in games in any way they can. And the big thing we always wanted to focus on with our team was that attitude was hugely important. So the only things we needed were like passion, dedication, an ability to collaborate. And the largest part of that was one of the things that I learned at Full Sail. One of my favorite teachers always hammered home, you can't have an ego in a creative environment. Like, it is a cancer. It destroys all creative endeavors. Like, as soon as somebody thinks their ideas are better than somebody else's, the conversation shuts down. So we were always very insistent, like, leave your ego at the door and like be proud of your work and you can defend it, but you always got to be able, like, reason has to win out, and whatever is best for the team and best for the game is the course that we have to take. And by maintaining on that the whole time, like, we really had, we built up a great environment with people who felt like they could all of their ideas were important and valued, and we all felt like we're on the same page and making something awesome together. We also got very lucky in that we found an audience early, and we listened to them. So one of the struggles a lot of indie games out there face is just not being able to get any kind of attention. I got really lucky in that regard with my co-founder, Co-Carnage. He is one of the top 50 streamers on Twitch right now. So when it got to Kickstarter time, it was a lot. We were much able to get in front of people's eyes and reach the people who might potentially want to back this project, much more so than if we were just trying to reach out to them organically. So I think that was a huge portion of why we were successful on Kickstarter, but we kind of took that initial momentum and we kept in touch with our fans through social media and meeting people at meetups like this and various conventions. So like I spent a lot of time just responding to messages personally. Not so much in the later stages of the project when I was just kind of feeling overwhelmed by everything and not enough time, but I always tried to reach out and have a personal connection with our fans and answer their questions and find out like what they thought was cool about Resurgence, what their ideas were, what they'd want to see, things they did or didn't want in the game. And people really responded well to like that personal touch and feeling like they were listened to and valued much more than any other like large company that's going to just straight up ignore them. So that was a big deal for us, and it enabled us to get a community of ambassadors, we called them. These were our super fans, basically. People that a lot of times backed us during the Kickstarter and really loved what we were doing and wanted to kind of take it up a notch. They were people that really helped us like spread the word and help us out in any way they possibly could. So they kind of acted as like a focus group for us because we knew that they were definitely the target audience, and they were going to give us straight feedback because they wanted the game to be good. So they were kind of the first group of people that we went to whenever we had a question, and if we needed help with anything. It was just great to have them, and I recommend any kind of indie team try and build up a similar little core group of fans for what they're doing. So those are the things that went really right with the project, but as for things that went wrong, the first one is just too little funding, too late. So like I said, when we had the Kickstarter, we thought that the goal was all we were going to need to complete this project. Maybe that was naive, but we found out over time that just the estimates we had when we went to Kickstarter were just off. I mean, game development is inherently hard, and any kind of software development, just breaking down a project of that magnitude into all the little pieces and how they connect and getting a good time estimate for each one is a huge task. I mean, we did the best we could, but over the course of development, we found out that we had basically we'd underscoped the project by about half, at least. So we had raised close to $200,000, but we were going to need more than double of that to actually finish this thing. That's why the delays started happening, and we really started scrambling to try to find more money, because we knew that otherwise we were just going to stall when we ran out of money, and everybody who was depending on us for, like, this was their daily paycheck now, was not going to be able to keep going if they had to find other work. Part of that was overhead. We had some really hefty fees from taxes, legal, and accounting. The taxes one, I thought I had researched properly. There's a lot of people who wrote about taxes and Kickstarters out there and everything, and I got some high-quality accountants involved from the beginning, but there was just some kind of miscommunication or misconception there. Like, I thought, my impression was the company was going to get taxed on how much money it had made or lost over the course of the year, and I would be personally taxed based on how much I paid myself, just a standard tax bracket. But what I found out was that we were taxed based on the money we had left in the account at the end of the year. And so the original plan was to have all that money spent by the end of the year and ship the game like the following month in January, but things were going kind of slower, so we had money left. So we got taxed on 30% of that, which added up to being like about $10,000. And I do recommend everybody get like really solid legal and accounting help, but also keep in mind that you have to make sure it's scaled to your needs. You don't necessarily need like the top tier guys that other large companies are going to use. It might just be more than you can afford. So I know we got good stuff, but it may have been more expensive than we should have spent on it. But it's still very much worth it if you do your taxes wrong, if you don't do the accounting properly, you're gonna lose a lot more money later when they come back for what you actually owe. So it's a matter of doing it right the first time and making sure you're not spending enough that it's going to bankrupt you. Another problem is that we started fundraising too late. Like I said, we thought we had enough money to kind of finish the product, to get it out there, and make some money off the initial release. But when we started realizing that where the schedule was and how much money we were going to need, we should have started fundraising a lot earlier. Part of the problem on that was just the size of our team. I just didn't have anybody to help me with that whole fundraising effort, and I didn't have any experience in business prior to this. I was kind of learning everything as I went, and unfortunately, I didn't have anybody to help me kind of pick up the slack until much later. And if we had been able to start fundraising a lot earlier and avoid the mistakes that we made and do things that much quicker, we might have had a better shot. But with the way things were, we ran out of money and we couldn't afford to keep going. And when that happens, you basically just hit a wall, and there's not many options after that. Other things that went wrong is that the overscope that I mentioned. So we knew from the very beginning that we had a very ambitious project, like making an RPG, and there's a lot of systems in there, and as we dug into them during production and realized how much that we had forgotten to break down or didn't realize at the time, the scope just grew and grew. And we had already promised people things in our Kickstarter, so we didn't want to have a lackluster role-playing game or have to cut essential things that we had promised these people. But looking back now, we should have started much smaller. We could have still potentially done an RPG, but we should have really minimized the features we were promising, even in the Kickstarter. We wanted to get people excited and to make them see the vision we were trying to do, but it's the classic lesson of under-promise and over-deliver. So for instance, like we had 2 different combat systems we were trying to accomplish, like real-time and turn-based. So even just removing one of those and focusing on one would simplified things drastically. Another problem is that we never really finished our pre-production. Like we thought we did. We kind of said like this is the end of pre-production and now we're starting the production phase. But with once we had to scale down the size of the team after the Kickstarter just for pure monetary purposes. Like we had to get our core guys, and we're only paying them just for. You can't really pay some people and have volunteers the rest of the way either. So there was a legal thing there, but that left us kind of short-staffed, and so that made it so the game design doc and our asset list was kind of always in flux. Like it never got to a point where like we said, this is finalized, we're not changing it anymore, and we can use this to move forward. Like we had a very iterative design approach, but these things prevented it from getting, sometimes redesigns happened and the scope grew and changed, or the requirements were just too vague for the programmers to work from. So all of this led to a lot of continuing pre-production work over the course of the process. And if that was done, me and other guys could have focused on other things that needed to get done anyway. There was also, we decided to switch engines during production. We had done everything prior to Kickstarter in Unity. And after the Kickstarter, we made the decision to switch to Unreal. We had a really big discussion with the team, and there were strong opinions on both sides. I still maintain that we made the right decision switching to Unreal, but of course that there were problems with that. Like the biggest benefits was that it allowed my team to collaborate that much better. Previously, we had a big bottleneck in that everything kind of had to go through a programmer to get into the engine. It was very difficult to get non-technical types working in engine and working on stuff. Unreal was totally the opposite. Like towards the end of the project, we actually had everybody working in there, totally comfortable and can work by themselves and do things without any aid. And I felt like the team was really gelling and everybody was working together and things were really taking shape. The downside, though, was that there was, of course, we had to change all of our code that would previously been written in C# to C++. All of our art assets were maintained, but we had to totally recode everything we'd done prior to that. That was something we were prepared for because the code base for the Unity prototype was honestly really shaky. We had a bunch of guys, we probably had like 4 or 5 guys working on it at that point, and each of them, they weren't communicating as well as they should have been, and nobody really knew all the other parts of the code. So things were getting slapped together at the end there, and it was just not as shaky. It was way too shaky to kind of build on further. So we had always said that was going to be a prototype, and we were going to throw it out and build it up again. And so switching engines kind of made that a necessity. It gave us a chance to kind of fix everything and make it cleaner, but there was a substantial amount of time in there kind of redoing all of that. Plus just the inherent learning curve and of learning a new engine. And there was also a lot of crashes in Unreal. My main programmer, the only programmer, kept a running tally about how many times they crashed for him, which was a constant source of frustration. There was also a big lack of documentation on the code side of things. There was tons of documentation on blueprints and design tools and a lot of the other fun features of Unreal, but there really wasn't much in terms of code. So that was another problem. Another thing was just having too small of a team for too big of a project. And part of that is that when we scaled down, I just took too much of it on myself. Since anybody that we didn't have a position to specifically covered, I kind of had to pick up the slack. So I became the CEO. I was the CEO and the creative director, but I also became social media manager, IT, administrative. I took care of everybody's payroll. I did all of the everything that wasn't like working on the game specifically, like I did a ton of that. But the game design and working on the game is what I enjoyed doing. So I kind of got myself in a bad position where I was being forced to do stuff that had to be done, but I didn't even like doing. And the point I'm making on the slide here is that you really need to have all your bases covered in terms of team leadership. Like the dream team is a business guy, a creative guy, and a technical guy. And I didn't have that. It was basically just me. I mean, I had my co-founder, but I mean, he was doing his Twitch thing, and not a lot of involvement on the game specifically. There was also a culture shift in just when we started as a hobby project and having to switch from this kind of like slow, get it done when it gets done, like as you have time kind of mentality, to all of a sudden money's on the line now and we are in a fast-paced startup environment. So that was a big adjustment to people who like didn't have to track their time previously, didn't have to come up with estimates for their work and like try and stick to it. So it just made accountability and just kind of taking initiative on getting things done a real struggle for some more than others, but that was kind of a constant problem. And like with the budget we came up with on Kickstarter, we barely had enough to kind of fund like the bare bones team that we needed. Like we had one programmer, like one modeler, and just basically one of everything, when we definitely needed multiple programmers and multiple artists. We'd always said that like once we got, like we were just going to have that for the beginning of the project, and as we got further, we would add more people as necessary. But as we got further and things were taking longer, we just didn't have the money to add those people at that time. So we just got in a situation where we were extremely understaffed, just missing some roles. Like we didn't have a character artist for the later stage of production, so we had these huge bottlenecks of like some things just couldn't get done. So those were the things that went really right and went really wrong with the project. And now I'm going to go over some just general lessons learned that I think other indie developers can kind of take away from this whole experience. So the first one is team up. So a big part of this is making sure you have the right team for what you're trying to do. And everybody needs to have the same level of commitment. Like, the team is what's going to make sure your project finishes, and like having people who are with you 100%, who are willing to work the nights and weekends to put in the crunch time and make sure things get done is really what's going to make something get to the end or save a dying project. The next point is to be lean. When you're in a business environment, if you've never done it before, it's really important to be as efficient with everything as possible. Like, once there's money on the table, time is your enemy. So every day that goes by is another chance that somebody else is going to make a similar game to you and get it out first, or somebody else is going to beat you to a deal. So you have to maintain this idea of urgency that like every second matters. And you got to kill your babies. Like, we're working in this creative thing that we've all spent all this blood, sweat, and tears on, but you got to be willing to let your things go. Like, if you designed a big chunk of code that is not actually, maybe it's not fun, or maybe like the vision of the game has changed. Like, you got to be willing to let those things go and roll with the punches and be able to adapt, so that for the greater good of everybody. So never lose focus on what the goal is, and don't get stuck on your little contribution or like your little favorite features. Like, especially if you're in a position of leadership and management, you got to be willing to make the hard choices and cut things for the good of the project. And there's always ways to simplify and reuse other things too. Like, you can always reduce your scope, essentially. And you got to find balance. When you come up with the concept of the game, you got to make sure, like, choose a genre or a subject matter that you're passionate about, but also make sure that it's something you can actually accomplish. Make sure it's a right fit for the team you have, and that you're not taking on more than you can chew. Like, I would encourage everybody to make the smallest thing you can starting out, and you can grow from there, but it's way more beneficial to finish something small than to not finish something larger, because you're always going to mess up the first things you work on, and you're going to learn from that, and you're going to do better next time. So might as well do that faster. And you also got to learn to estimate better. Like, this goes for everybody all the time. Like, just being in any kind of technical field like this, you're going to need to know how to estimate your tasks, because somebody's got a schedule and a trying to get an idea of how big the project is, and your ability to estimate better will make things easier on everybody else. And I know it's hard to say, like, to wrap your head around some big functionality, or to answer these questions when you don't really know all the details, but it is a skill, and the more you use it, the better you get at it. And so I encourage everybody to try it all the time, and getting better at that will just be better for your own professional development. And even if it's just like a rule of thumb of, like, I know how long I think this is going to take me, and it generally takes about twice as long as that. Once you start realizing these things about yourself, you'll better understand your own workflow and be able to communicate that to others. Question?
So I'm just curious, did you use any kind of resources or tools when you were doing your task estimation?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of like schooling?
Regarding what do we use for task estimation, we used a couple different things. Like, I learned a couple different tools in school. Like, there's MS Project, Basecamp. We learned Handsoft was one. Basically anything that lets you kind of like break down tasks and assign them to people and give time or cost estimates, that kind of thing. When we first started out, before the Kickstarter, just free hobby stuff, we were using a tool called Asana, which was free. We had to kind of, with the amount of people we had to kind of cobble it together, because you could only have a certain number of like people on a free account. Like, I think it maxed out like 15. So we had 3 different Asana workspaces, one for code, one for art, and one for design. And that was not, it got the job done, but it wasn't the best. We since moved on to a tool called Hack and Plan that I really like. It's supposed to replicate the feel of like Jira or other tools like that, but with a very specific focus on game development. So I like it a lot in that you can do all that stuff that I talked about. You can comment on tasks, assign multiple people, link the ones that are connected, and create dependencies. You can see it all as a list or as a Kanban wall, for being real agile. And they also let you see the whole game in terms of like current task list and your whatever milestones you set up, or you can see it in your game hierarchy. So you can see, based on like however your game is divided up, whether it's like levels or chapters, and like all the specific features and assets that are tied to them, you can look at your game in that view as well. So it's kind of a new tool that they've been working on, and we've been giving them feedback as they worked on it. So I think it's really shaping up well for like a great tool for developers out there. So you can use it for free as an indie, or you can pay for their premium version to get all the extra special features like Gantt charts and other things and analytics that you might want to. So yeah, you definitely got to have some kind of tool, even if you're just using like a Trello list of cards of stuff that's being worked on now and stuff that's not being started yet. But the better you can do there, the better off you'll be. Some more lessons learned. Get mentored. Like, there's tons of people out there who have run a business or run a game studio or just done this kind of thing before. And the sooner you find those people and ask them for advice, the better off you're going to be. Like, a lot of these people are very, very friendly. They want to give back. I found some great mentors, and I just wish that I had found them earlier. So I really recommend people to try make those connections and try and find people to help shape you and not make the same mistakes they did. You won't regret that. The next one is to lawyer up, as I mentioned before. When you're working on a team like this, it benefits you to to get everything in writing and to make sure you have somebody looking over those documents to make sure that they'll stand up in court. Because you never know how things are going to turn out. Maybe you have a falling out with a co-founder or a member of your team. Maybe somebody tries to steal from you or take you to court. It's better to have all this stuff, to know you have your documents laid out. Everything is, all your T's are crossed essentially, so you know you have the peace of mind that you're covered based on whatever happens, and you can focus on just making the thing. Nothing is worse than finding out that somebody's trying to sue you because you're making a game that's too similar, or you use their title or something else and just get totally distracted from making the thing. And of course, you need a good accountant too to plan for your taxes, as I mentioned. Make sure you got that covered. Also made a point about a producer. When we were talking about the task management and stuff, it's really beneficial to make sure you have someone who's totally focused on the schedule and the progress of the project you're working on. Like I said, I was trained in that at school, but when I had to take on all these other responsibilities, I wasn't able to focus on that side of everything as much as I wanted to. So I eventually did hire another producer, someone to focus on that full time, and that made a big difference in just the general workflow and the work that everybody was doing. So having that from the very beginning, so you can focus on the code or the art or whatever you're doing, is a big benefit. Like, just someone needs to make sure that the project is moving forward as it should and things are getting done. Another point is know when to quit. So this was a question I wrestled with for a while, but eventually I came up with that there is a big difference between just giving up on something and cutting your losses. Like, I was not raised to be a quitter, but sometimes you have to realize that you're not getting back from something the effort that you're putting into it. And you got to look at it as just like, what are you getting back? What is the return on the time and the effort you're putting into something? And if it's too low, then you got to think about if that's the right move for you or not. And with this studio, we were into a position where we couldn't keep going any longer without just asking people to keep working for free and having all this potential debt looming over our heads. And it wasn't a good position to be in, and we decided that it wasn't good for anybody, so we weren't going to take that risk. And the final point is to be happy. So if you're not happy with what you're doing, working on your game and running your studio, then something's wrong, and you got to figure out what. And in my case, like, I got pushed into a role that I didn't really want to be in because I felt like someone had to run the show, and I didn't have anybody else willing to step up and do it, essentially. So I didn't get to work on the things that I found really enjoyable anymore, and that made my dream job slowly morph into a job that I didn't want to go to. So you got to make sure that it's still fun for you, and if it's not, do something else, whatever that means. So, some final conclusions for me personally, based on this whole experience. So, like, based on how everything went, would I do it again? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. It was an equally stressful and rewarding experience for me, but I got to be my own boss. I got to work on a project that I loved, and I would totally do it again if I had the knowledge that I have now. I don't think I'd want to struggle through the same mistakes that I made last time all over again, but knowing what I know now, I would definitely do it again. Under better circumstances. Another conclusion is to never give up. There were a lot of times during this project where bad stuff happened, like somebody quit, big bill came in, or there were times where it just didn't feel worth it anymore. And I encourage everybody to never give up. Just as long as you still as long as you're not at a point where you can't, it's not smart to continue anymore. Just never let that stuff get to you. Like, believe in yourself and really look at what you're making, and if something's not working, figure out a way to adapt, to pivot, and sacrifice the things that are unimportant. And for some people, that'll be a social life or their personal relationships for the good of their company, and for others, it'll be money or like a cushy desk job. But figure out what that is for you and what you really want out of life and your business, and don't give up on the dream. Another point is to network. Like, always get out there and meet people, even if you're a quiet type like me and you don't like talking to people you don't know very easily. Like, get out there and talk to people, make friends, and always try and help people. Like, I've always been surprised that when I just offered to help somebody, like before I asked for anything in return, like, people just generally, they want to give back any way they can, and everybody wants to help everybody else succeed. So get out there and make those connections. Goes to my next point of don't be a dick. The game development industry is very small compared to others, and it's a very tight-knit group, and word gets around. So your reputation as a developer is very important. And I think the industry is known for generally having very friendly and kind people in it, and that kindness goes a long way. So if you put yourself out there to help people and to go above and beyond and just pay it forward, essentially, you'll be surprised at what comes back to you. And as for Resurgence, the dream is not dead. Nectar is done now, but Resurgence will live on. I still retain the IP of the game myself, and I still have the loyalty and respect of my team. We all still want to make this thing a reality someday in some form. Unfortunately, we all have to go kind of take care of life now and find new jobs and find a paycheck and get back to a stable ground. But there very much is a desire to keep it going and to finish it someday. So maybe it'll be episode 1 as we thought it was, or maybe it'll be some books or some other games in the history of that world or whatever else. But I can't tell you what's going to happen now. But we as developers don't want to give up on that dream, and we're going to do whatever we can to make something happen. So yeah, that's my talk. So yeah, you guys watching at home, I'm Rob Bucchiet. I was the CEO and creative director of Nectar Games Studios, and you can reach me at that email there, robbucchiet@gmail.com. So yeah, we didn't really have many questions during the presentation, so what else you guys got?
In terms of going through Greenlight, was that helpful?
Steam?
Steam Greenlight, yeah. Was that helpful? I mean, what was the process like? Because my guess is it didn't help much with the publishing?
Was Steam Greenlight helpful? Yes, we launched Steam Greenlight near the end of our Kickstarter. Probably should have done it like at the same time as the Kickstarter, ideally, but it is a good way to bring more fans to both places. We got really lucky in that we were greenlit in a week, which is really rare. I think it's because we already had like a large number of backers at that point, and everybody just clicked that upvote button. But it's Steam Greenlight's being phased out. I'm not sure if you heard that yet. People are generally being grandfathered in if they were greenlit already. But I think any way that you can get more eyes on your project and get more feedback from people is going to be worth it. We didn't continue on through any of the other process of being greenlit and like what it meant to get on the Steam store, so I can't really speak to that. Okay. Uh, Based on what I know now, would I have handled the Kickstarter campaign differently? Yeah, I think I definitely would have. I think I would have promised a much smaller game, first of all. So maybe less of a story arc, or less features in the first one. Um, it's important when you're on Kickstarter. It's important to make sure that your goal is what you think you can deliver the product on. Like if you set your goal arbitrarily low, um, and like you're going to need to come up with funding some other ways, people are going to think you're a liar and you're going to lose the faith of your backers. You don't want that. So you got to make sure that whatever you're funding, and they expect to have a finished project based on hitting the goal. So you need to be as thorough as you can there with estimating and figuring out exactly how much you need. Like I said, that's a difficult process to do. So, I mean, I probably would have put even more work into like figuring out exactly how much we did need, but I wouldn't arbitrarily raise that number up or down to try and be more successful. One thing I would have done on the Kickstarter is we kind of felt some pressure to release the Kickstarter at the time of the year that we did, because based on the research that I did, like some parts of the year are more likely to have successful projects than others. And I mean, games have kind of gotten a bad rap on Kickstarter for a good reason. I mean, I guess we're kind of part of that statistic now of things that didn't finish. But certain parts of the year are better. Like April and November are particularly good because like people are getting money back from taxes, or it's just far enough in front of Christmas that they have money to spend. So like there are some parts of the year considered like ideal, but I would definitely not have. I guess it's more January than November. But yeah, I definitely would have felt less pressure to launch the Kickstarter at a certain time, and made sure we were absolutely ready to launch first. I didn't have a lot of money to put in. I mean, I did spend money on. Well, the question was, did I put in any of my own money in? I spent some money on tools and like traveling to conventions and general stuff that we needed, but I didn't have any money to put in myself. Like, and I was paying myself like basically minimum wage, same as everybody else on the team, just trying to make that money last as long as possible, but still give people a ability to pay their basic expenses. So we were definitely not like going out and buying cars or doing anything else stupid like that. My co-founder put in money and I put in time. So, I mean, value that time as you will, but I like to think of my time as valuable, and I could have been putting that towards a career at like a larger company, established company. So, in the back, red shirt.
Hey, do you think your passion and vision in the beginning kind of snowballed and left you too much? Kind of got away from it before you could really cover the risk with what needed to be done to do that?
Did my passion and vision snowball the scope? Yeah, probably. I mean, I was the chief creative guy on the project, so like I wanted to make sure not only we had a good RPG, like we had the best RPG. So that did kind of put me in, and I was also running the team, so I should have been more of a hard-ass CEO or producer and be willing to cut things and have penalties for stuff that wasn't done on time or was causing problems, as opposed to just thinking about like what was going to make the game better. So that's another point where having somebody else to balance that out or take on that role would have been really helpful. But me being kind of tugged between both worlds was not ideal. The scope of the project didn't really snowball after the Kickstarter. It was more of just the complexity of each of the features that we were trying to do became more and more apparent as we started digging into them and working on them. And like we thought we had written out sufficient requirements of like how to make this mechanic and this feature work. And then the programmer starts working on it and he's like, well, what about this and what about that? And then we realize we've forgotten like, or we glossed over like half of how this thing's supposed to work. And you start building up technical debt at that point. So that's something I wish I had anticipated better, of course. Yeah. Am I going to stay in the industry? Yes, absolutely. I still love video games, the whole game dev industry, even after all the highs and lows of this building up a company and then watching it burn. In the meantime, I've realized that I want to go work at a company that is more established and get more experience from somebody who really knows what they're doing before I try and give it another one of these goes. But yeah, I'm still very passionate about games, and I still want this to be my career. But I'm also planning a wedding later this year, and I have got to build up my nest egg again. So I might need to be doing some other stuff in the meantime to get on solid ground again. Any other questions? Yep.
What was the name of the tool that you used?
Are you talking about the task tracking tool? The one we used was called a Hack and Plan. It's Hack and Plan. You're welcome.
And just in general, thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I can imagine it's a difficult thing to talk about, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult thing to talk about. I'm happy to do it. By definition, it's a failure, but I don't like to think about it that way. I feel like as long as you've learned something from an experience and you can move on forward and not make the same mistakes again, and especially if you can share it with other people and help them not make the same mistakes, you can't really consider it a failure. Because we're all failing constantly until we succeed. So, other questions? All right.